What is our legacy? When is it time to let go of what we've been taught? When is it time to let go of what we've been given? Indeed, our cells reflect ancestral history. Our tissues tell the story of our dynasty. Yet somewhere deep inside, far beyond the membranes, far within the depth of our nucleus, rests a potential to make a choice, to declare our identity as separate, to find the I in the we, to find the I in the us, not despite but because of the we, because of the us. This is such a story. In a colony of albatrosses, over rocky cliffs where they lay their eggs, if you ever looked up, you'd see dozens of albatrosses beautifully circling in invisible paths, ascending and descending. You'd see dozens of albatrosses with a wingspan of infinity, rulers over the air, rulers over the wind. And in one such colony, one day a young albatross hatched. And when his parents looked in his eyes, they knew that their son would be the most courageous of albatrosses ever to be born. And they fed him with the best of foods, the most beautiful fish, the freshest and most nourishing. And they praised him, and he became the most beloved son and heir of the colony. Albatross mothers would come from their own nests, hoping that his luck would catch on their wings. And his parents were so proud. Indeed, the young albatross grew bigger and bigger every day, and every day his courage grew with him, and every day his daring increased. He had a destiny to meet. His body was the body of a warrior, his beak the beak of a fighter, his eyes so sharp, his claws so painfully fierce and accurate. And like any albatross, before he could speak, before he could walk, he already wanted to fly. The albatross would look at the circling albatrosses above, gliding with grace and flying along and between thermals, and he knew that one day he would be like one of them, that one day he would ascend above them all to be the most courageous, the most daring of albatrosses, just like his parents envisaged. So no one was really surprised that very shortly after he learned to fly, and indeed he did ascend to the highest of heights, daring to ride on the most frightening thermals, daring to go into the most turbulent of turbulences. No one was surprised when shortly after he learned to fly, not even mastering the art of flying just yet, this young albatross left the colony. His parents were sad but also so very proud. They knew that they could expect nothing less of their own son, to dare and reach beyond what was ever reached before. He would establish a new colony, they thought. And while they were thinking, while they were weaving dreams for their son, while they were building another nest for a new baby to hatch, the albatross was flying high in the skies, breathing the thin air of high altitudes, overlooking the multitude of colonies, observing the curving of the earth, the seas and the oceans, the open lands. He was the ruler of everything he could see. He was in control, young and reckless, and he felt that there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that he couldn't do. So he joyously cried and screamed into the air with fearlessness and clarity and great pride. day he found a place where he knew he wanted to stay and settle. The area was big, high and strong mountain, a steep and rugged cliff. Cold black lava was underholding the ocean, a mountain that was fiercely cut in the middle to meet the ocean, a noble fjord, and around what others could not see, but he had the natural sense to sense the most dangerous of thermals. Hundreds of air currents, boiling and bubbling, were interweaving in beautiful arabesques inside and outside, mingling, merging. This is the place where I want to live, he thought. This is home. A small colony of albatrosses lived nearby, and they dared not reach this area, which was far too turbulent for them, but not for our own albatross. So they looked at this young and arrogant, frighteningly self-assured albatross, who stood on the top of the cliff, on the black mountain, spreading his wings and leaping into the air. Swirls and spirals and slopes, and the thermal embraced him, carrying him up and down, playing with him. The young albatross did not learn a lot about thermals and air turbulences, as he left the colony before his parents had the chance to teach him. But he could feel them, and he loved flying among them, descending with great speed, ascending through giving in into the air. It was such an uplifting feeling. One can appreciate what an uplifting feeling it is to give in to a force bigger than you, to give in to a force bigger than yours. And this albatross took days of pleasure in flying. So you, having a body-mind which is bound to gravity even more, feeling the muscles tire as they slowly give in, letting go of bones only to be pulled into earth, sinking, where your thoughts start to make connections between what was and what is, when yourself starts to make decisions of changing what was and creating a new becoming. On a day of inherited destiny, the albatross was flying very high above the place that he called home, when two strict and stubborn air currents caught him in between them. He couldn't control the pulls up and down, forced to recognize his own powerlessness, a mere grain of sand in the hand of the great whistling wind. Kneel down, for the lessons of humility are being taught by the drafts. He was pulled down in a jolt, very strongly pulled down and down, deeper and deeper, and he fell, and it was so frightening, and he crashed against the earth. For long days he lay there, bleeding and aching, his bones fractured, his ego stamped upon, and his confidence totally battered. Limping, he made his way back home, crawling and walking. The pain was far too big. He was afraid to open his wings. From that day onwards, this albatross never flew again. However, the albatross did manage to establish a family. He was still a good enough fisher, so he could impress the female albatross with gestures of flattering and courtship. Their nest on the slope of the cliff became a nest of a non-flying albatross. She was a lovely albatross, and they made a family on the slopes of that rock. She had glimmer in her eyes, but he was too afraid. When the tide was at its highest, the mother gave birth to a successor. One son, one strong albatross chick. But the father was too terrified of flying, so terrified that he forbade his wife and his son from flying. He instilled fear in their hearts. He dared his family never to fly again. "It is far too dangerous," he said. "You wouldn't know what is expecting you. The air is waiting, lurking to kill you, to pull you down and destroy you." The family was brainwashed with the elusive, unbearable, torturing fears and shame of the father. And from the day that he was born, the young albatross heard nothing but warnings against the temptations and about the dangers of flying. And he felt guilty for looking at other birds in the fly and envying them deeply. Day by day the little albatross grew, not daring to fly, yet unable to take his eyes off the skies, of the masters of the air. The beautiful chatty seagulls, the daunting birds of prey, the numerous individuals in the pelican's quarters passing by, or the long and gentle bodies of the indispensable storks, occasional flocks of crows, hospitable strong terns, all the birds that flooded the skies with their wings. But above all, he admired the albatrosses, rulers of the skies, masters of the oceans, the albatrosses with wingspans of infinity. He was so jealous, so fearful, so very ashamed. But he grew well, strong and healthy, as happy as he could be, and a growing sense of fantasy started to tingle, started to tickle in his body. Fantasies of flying, wrapped in guilt, wrapped in fear, surrounded by shame. You see, his mother was a good mother. She gave him love, yet he saw her eyes slowly becoming duller and duller, as if the source of life itself was being taken away from her, and he ached for her pain. The young albatross looked at his dad, and he saw the fierce that was once there being replaced by fear and impotence, and he couldn't understand why. And he saw his mum dulling away, fading away, until one day, at the ambient psychedelic dusk, the albatross saw his mother coming towards him. She walked on the cliff, walking towards him, and he looked deeply into her eyes. She could not see him, but he saw. He knew that something deeply has changed. Her eyes were glimmering, shining and big, and he saw the skies reflecting in her eyes. And the young albatross knew that she had disobeyed the father and took on to fly. From that day onwards, he saw that look in his mother's eyes more and more frequently, and every time he could clearly tell she came back from flying. Still she pretended never to have flown, still she pretended to obey his father's commands, to stay on the ground. But her gestures changed, and her features changed, all saying loud and clear, I am here. I am alive. You know that the courage to break a cycle can often take an inevitable turn, whereupon the force of life cannot but break free and flow through you. On one lucid occasion, he even saw her landing. He saw her huge wings closing down as she lands, her claws clasping and grabbing into the earth. And he saw her eyes with the sky reflecting in them like a crystal ball. He felt so guilty for sharing this precious secret with her. He felt so guilty for not telling his dad. He felt ashamed for his own wanting to share this flying. He felt ashamed for carrying this awful knowledge. He felt ashamed and proud at the same time. And this installed a great deal of confusion in this albatross. The young albatross started to follow his mum without her noticing it. On a windy morning, when sunrise made the world look dusty and hazy and yellow, the wind sang of impossible feats. He followed her to a cliff. It was a small and hidden cliff, and one that you couldn't see from their home, and indeed there were very few of these. So he saw her reaching the edge of the cliff, turning back to see that nobody was looking, and opening her wings. Clasping them together once or twice, she leaped into the air, and catching an amazing thermal, she took off. When there was no one around anymore, he stood there, in the place from which she took off. He stood on the edge looking down, and he could understand why his father warned him. He understood why his father warned him, because it was ever so tempting. And indeed, some unstoppable force in him lured him to jump. Spreading his wings, the albatross flew, gradually descending in circles, until he reached the ground. And although it didn't last very long, it was one of the moments the albatross would never forget in his entire life. For these moments form our resume. These moments carve life on our faces. Your first smile, your first step, first utter word, your first love. The first time you were you is forever in the making, forever changing, engaging your memory to alter the past, engaging your imagination to carve the future, spreading wings and exploring possible futures. And what is it in you that could let you know how to recognize these moments that change your life? And does it matter if you recognize them at all? You see, it wasn't the last time that he did that. In fact, his leaps and gliding became more and more frequent. He didn't know how to fly, but he knew how to spread his wings wide open and let the wind carry him. He didn't know how to fly, but he could enjoy the sensation of flying. And every day he found yet another excuse to go for a walk and disappear. And his mother and himself started to recognize in each other's eyes the glimmer, the shimmering, the shining of the eyes. Every day he went to the hidden cliff, standing there, looking down, feeling the temptation growing and casting over the fear, casting over the guilt and shame, and jumping, gliding in circles all the way down. And the pleasure grew in him like pleasure can grow in you, and the guilt increased in him like guilt can increase in you, and fear spread in him like fear can spread in you, and shame contaminated him like shame can contaminate you. He didn't know about thermals, he didn't know about air turbulences, he didn't know about flying, but he had enjoyed, and he had known pleasure, shame, fear and guilt. And for the first time in his life, despite of the fear, the shame and the guilt, for the first time in his life, I think you could truly say that he was alive. And a secret was shared between him and his mum, and they were recognizing each other's secret. And he imagined that her smile towards him embedded the silent approval, holding the respect of the ally. More and more he became distant from his father. More and more he felt guilty about flying. More and more the fear grew, anticipating the punishment that awaited him. Until one day he could no longer carry the burden of guilt, shame and fear, and he told his father he just had to do that. The fury of his father was so painfully unimaginable that the young albatross made a choice and left home. The guilt was bubbling in him, the shame was boiling in him, and the fear burned his soul with the regret. And he walked away from home, further and further away, until he found himself, after a few days, because time has passed without the body noticing it, standing on the highest of cliffs. Down below, sharp, painfully frightening rocks were resting. Up above, sky, as clear as sky could be. And he stood there, his legs shaking with fear, his heart sinking from shame, his belly burning with guilt. He stood there, and the temptation increased. The temptation increased, but unlike the past, he could no longer deny the presence of fear, the burden of guilt and shame. The temptation grew, so when he jumped, something heavy jumped with him. And the thermals were so strong, they carried him upwards like a feather. The air was stroking him, the winds exploring him, the currents were playing with him. The thermals were carrying him around, and the turbulences like waves washing him over. And not unlike his father, many years ago, he was caught up between two currents, one going up and one going down, and he lost control and he was drifting away, swinging and abruptly jolting with no hope, until he crashed down and all came to rest. He was lucky to have crashed on a soft sand and not on the sharp rocks nearby. He was lucky not to have broken his shoulder bone or his wings. He was lucky to have survived at all. Yet it was so painful. So he was lying there, wounded, feeling guilty and shameful, aching, feeling so sorry for himself. He felt guilty and shameful. It's all my fault, he thought. It's all my self-inflicted destiny. I deserve it. At times like this, we forget our natural born rights. We forget that we have the right to be here. You forget that you have the right to be here. You have the right to be alive. You have the right to have a body. You have the right to need. You have the right to have. You have the right to feel all your feelings. You have the right to express your emotions. You have the right to have your needs met. You have the right to be sexual. You have the right to act from your center. You have the right to be responsible for who you are. You have the right to love. You have the right to be loved. You have the right to speak your truth. You have the right to be heard. You have the right to communicate with clarity. You have the right to see with clarity. You have the right to be seen as who you are. You have the right for truth. You have the right for connection. You have the right for touch. You have the right for your spirituality. You have the right to belong to God. You have the right to belong to Spirit. You have the right to be loved by God. You have the right to be seen by others. You have the right to have a soul. You have the right to be spoken truth to. You have the right to be loved for who you are. You have the right to be clear. You have the right to have limitations. You have the right to have boundaries. You have the right to be seen as sexual. You have the right to be tended respectfully. You have the right to say yes. You have the right to say no. You have the right for ground. You have the right to surrender to gravity. You have the right to be held. You have the right to fight for your rights. You have the right to be here. And he looked above, as wounded as he was, and saw a gliding hawk. He saw the hawk using thermals, and through giving into them, flying with grace. He saw the hawk using his wings. He saw the hawk going in between turbulences. He saw the hawk emerging from turbulences, clapping his wings and ascending again. He saw the hawk and admired his abilities. He saw the hawk and wished he could do the same. He saw the hawk and the hawk saw him, and slowly descending in circles, landed by the wounded albatross and looked him in the eyes. The hawk stood on the rock and looked at the big albatross, the king of the oceans. "I was looking at you flying," said the albatross, "and I admire your abilities, for I was never taught how to fly. I want to learn your skills and ways and magic, for I know not how to fly and I wish to learn. I want to learn to fly so I can be a bird, so I can truly be an albatross." And the hawk looked at him sharply. "I know that albatrosses are the kings of the ocean, are the kings of the air," he said, "and I will teach you. But you would have to pay me with fish and protect me when I need you to." Well, the albatross quite naturally agreed, and soon after he recovered, the albatross commenced his training. He was a quick learner and a keen student, and the hawk taught him how to pay attention to his own senses, learning to identify and recognize thermals, learning when there is an air current going up and when there is an air current going down, learning to differentiate the slow drafts from the quick ones, to discriminate between warm and cold currents, learning to navigate between them. The albatross learned to activate his muscles and to use his wings, to move with grace, to fly and glide. The albatross learned to ascend and to descend. He learned to be free. And he flew farther and farther away. His muscles became stronger, his eyes more shining, his whole body was present, his whole soul was embodied. He was flying. One day, he flew so high that he could see the curves of the earth. He could see for great distances, and he saw far away a place that was not unknown to him. And his wings took him there, and he floated above that place, descending in small circles, slower and slower. And he could see this place, and he recognized those that were over there, down there. And then he lost something. Something fell from him. Something slowly left his body, going down, down, falling deeper and deeper. Fear leaving the body, descending quicker, falling deeper and deeper, leaving the body, falling down, down, and crashing against the earth, splashing blue sprinkles around in beautiful patterns. Guilt leaving the body, descending quicker, falling deeper and deeper, leaving the body, falling down, down, and crashing against the earth, splashing fiery orange sprinkles around in burning patterns. Shame leaving the body, descending quicker, falling deeper and deeper, leaving the body, falling down, down, and crashing against the earth, splashing bloody red sprinkles around in streaming rivers. Expectations leaving the body, descending quicker, falling deeper and deeper, leaving the body, falling down, down, and crashing against the earth, against the rocket cliffs, splashing magnificent yellow sprinkles around, leftovers of expectations in a sun-like patterns. Inherited limitations, leaving the body, descending quicker, falling deeper and deeper, leaving the body, falling down, down, and crashing against the earth, leaving no traces behind. And the albatross circled, finding a thermal to join, giving into it and ascending high up again, higher and higher. And he saw the leftovers of fear, guilt and shame and expectations. And he saw that nothing remained of his inherited limitations. And inside him great pleasure grew bigger and bigger, for he knew that whatever fear, guilt or shame, whatever expectations and limitations he shall have from this day onwards, these will truly be his own. And the albatross spread his wings as far and wide as he could, and he flew. And he had a wingspan